Serial killers are rarely famous for their opinions. However, high-profile murderers attract a specific type of celebrity intrigue, and the types of people who want to know the grisly details of various crimes often wonder how the alleged perpetrator might think. The FBI has warned about the potential dangers of media talking heads, but there is a tremendous cottage industry of experts and pseudo-experts ready to fulfill an audience's endless interest in convicted killers, including documenting their opinions on other convicted murderers. Once serial killers land in custody, a world of reporters, writers, and interested professionals tend to record their stories. Some of these media voices manage to speak to killers directly, and their barrage of questions sometimes touches a raw nerve. In other cases, perpetrators are so excited to talk that they put their opinions out there on their own. No two serial killers are identical, but they often share some commonalities. To no one's surprise, a lot of serial killers have wildly negative opinions about their fellow convicted murderers. John Wayne Gacy hated Jeffrey Dahmer. John Wayne Gacy confessed to approximately 30 murders in 1978, 6 years after he committed his first known murder. After Gacy confessed, authorities found 29 bodies on his property and 4 in nearby rivers. 2 years before his 1994 execution, Gacy spoke to CBS 2's Walter Jacobson. While speaking to Jacobson for more than 2.5 hours, Gacy vociferously denied the crimes to which he had previously confessed. Gacy recontextualized his confessions, denying all of the previous statements he had made to police and investigators. He bristled at any connection Jacobson made to the 33 murders of which he'd been convicted. One of the most heated moments in Jacobson's interview involves bringing up other killers. Jacobson mentioned names like David Berkowitz and Ted Bundy, but Gacy pushed back against any comparisons. Gacy told Jacobson, "God, I hate that when they put me in the same club with them." He reserved slightly more nuanced commentary for Jeffrey Dahmer. By the time Gacy's interview aired, Dahmer had received 16 life sentences. When Jacobson asked the killer clown what he thought of Dahmer, Gacy chose to discuss the fact that Dahmer was not declared insane during his trial. Gacy strongly believed that Dahmer's case represented a failure of the justice system. He stated, "If Jeffrey Dahmer doesn't meet the requirements for insanity, then I'd hate like hell to run into the guy that does." Edmund Kemper despised Herbert Mullen. Ed Kemper lives in the California medical facility in Vacaville, where he will most likely die. Kemper has been incarcerated on 8 counts of homicide since 1973. He killed his grandparents in 1964 when he was 15 years old, then carried out a string of murders in 1972 and 1973. Kemper's extended stay provided countless opportunities to collect interesting stories, and he attracted public attention by speaking to a pair of profilers from the FBI. The November 1, 1973, issue of the Santa Cruz Sentinel covered a portion of the co-ed killer's trial. Of specific note, staff writer Tom Honig recounted an exchange between Kemper and the district attorney. The DA asked Kemper why he'd thrown water on the man in the cell beside him during his stay at the San Mateo County Jail. Kemper discussed his bizarre relationship with Herbert William Mullen. Mullen killed 13 people in California, his killing spree overlapping with Kemper's. Kemper was very candid about his feelings toward Mullen. He described throwing water on Mullen to shut him up. Kemper considered Mullen a nuisance, but he developed a system to solve that problem. Kemper rewarded Mullen's silence with peanuts, positively conditioning him to be a model inmate. This strange arrangement led Kemper to call Mullen mentally ill. Mullen passed away in 2022, but Kemper was still serving his sentence as of 2024. Randy Stephen Kraft and William Bonin loathed each other. According to Vanity Fair in 1990, 4 convicted serial killers met every day for a game of bridge on San Quentin State Prison's death row. The players were Randy Stephen Kraft, William Bonin, Doug Clark, and Lawrence Bittaker. Kraft was the scorecard killer who remains in San Quentin after the police found a coded list of his alleged kills in 1983. Bonin was the freeway killer, a nickname he shared with Kraft. Clark, along with an accomplice, was the Sunset Strip killer who targeted sex workers in Los Angeles. Bittaker was one of the two toolbox killers who kidnapped, tortured, and murdered 5 girls in 1979. San Francisco-based writer Mark McNamara observed and interviewed the 4 killers about their daily game. To hear him tell it, Kraft and Bonin never got along. McNamara described the breakdown of each game. Bridge requires 2 teams of 2, so Kraft played with Clark while Bonin partnered with Bittaker. McNamara offhandedly mentioned that Kraft and Bonin loathe each other and refuse to play together. This kept them from playing on the same side, but they still joined in card games every day. The relationships on San Quentin's death row seem quite complex, but apparently there's still plenty of room for hate. Israel Keyes thought BTK was a wimp. Wichita police arrested Dennis Rader and charged him with 10 counts of first-degree murder in 2005. Rader was in hiding for more than 25 years before his arrest. Under his self-appointed nickname, BTK, Rader killed at least 10 people between 1974 and 1991. In the lead-up to the trial, multiple news sources issued shaky reports that implied confessions from Rader. Rader initially refused to speak at his arraignment, but he became more talkative at his trial. Rader confessed his crimes in vivid detail but offered no apology or contrition. A few weeks later, he expressed his faith and remorse after several statements from his victims' families. This rambling expression of guilt earned him some condemnation from Israel Keyes. Keyes robbed banks, burglarized homes, and killed at least 3 people. He was obsessed with serial killers, specifically idolizing Ted Bundy. The Anchorage Daily News reports an interview Frank Russo conducted with Keyes. Russo, the assistant U.S. attorney for Alaska, chatted with Keyes shortly before his death by suicide in 2012. He mentioned Keyes' appreciation for Bundy and his feelings on BTK. Russo believed Keyes saw Rader as a wimp for apologizing to his victims' families. This seemed to be a consistent belief of Keyes, who also stated that his favorite serial killers were those who were still on the loose. Ian Brady wrote a book on serial killers. Ian Brady and his partner Myra Hindley committed the so-called Moors murders in and around Manchester, England. They killed 5 children between 1963 and 1965. Brady spent 19 years in prison before his failing health got him hospitalized under the Mental Health Act. He spent the rest of his life at Ashworth Psychiatric Hospital, where he routinely requested death. During his time at Ashworth, Brady wrote The Gates of Janus, a book about the psychology of serial killers. Each chapter covers a specific killer, many of whom he exhibits strong opinions on. One of his strangest takes involves Ted Bundy. Brady described Bundy's character in detail. His language shifts between hagiographical praise and damning criticism. Brady considered Bundy a very competent liar. In Gates of Janus, he repeatedly compares Bundy to a politician. He specifically notes that Bundy should have been a public servant who used his position of power to fleece his constituents. There are elements of Brady's text that read like he's applauding Bundy, but his prolonged description of the notorious American killer as an accomplished deceiver also seems like a withering critique. He's certainly less kind to Bundy than he is to many of his other subjects. Ian Brady and Raymond Morris repeatedly attacked each other. Raymond Morris killed 3 children in Staffordshire, England, between 1965 and 1968. His activities became known as the Cannock Chase murders. Morris was convicted on 1 murder charge and was widely believed to be responsible for the other 2. He started his life sentence at HM Prison Durham in 1969, just over 3 years after convicted child murderer Ian Brady arrived at the facility. The two killers, both among the nation's most notorious, met in prison and fought a couple of unusual battles. Birmingham Live reports from an unearthed news clipping that unpacks Brady and Morris's rivalry. In 2 incidents, the men attacked each other with hot liquids. The paper suggests that Brady struck first. He poured hot tea on Morris, evidently selecting his concoction to deal damage. He brought his tea to a boil and added sugar, ensuring that the scalding liquid would stick to Morris's head. This landed Brady in solitary confinement for 28 days. Morris later retaliated, pouring hot water over Brady. He received the same sentence. Pedro Rodriguez Filo, also known as Killer Petey, was a vigilante serial killer who may have inspired Dexter. His story feels pulled from a comic book. Rodriguez started his career by robbing and killing drug dealers, gaining notoriety across Sao Paulo, Brazil. He reportedly lost his pregnant girlfriend to gang violence, sparking an escalation in his campaign of violence. Rodriguez was convicted of killing 71 people, all of them supposedly criminals, though many believe he killed over 100 people. He was 14 when he started and 18 when he got arrested. Rodriguez killed several fellow prisoners, consistently elongating his sentence. One of his potential targets escaped his grasp. Francisco de Assis Pereira, also known as the Park Maniac, received a sentence of 268 years imprisonment after raping and murdering 11 women and assaulting 9 others. Rodriguez expressed his disgust toward Pereira to reporter Marcelo Rezende. Pereira apparently drew Rodriguez's hatred immediately. Rodriguez detailed their first encounter, suggesting that he'd be dissatisfied to leave jail without having killed Pereira, though nothing ever came of it. Ted Bundy didn't care for the Green River Killer. One of the most common threads in serial killer fiction depicts an incarcerated killer using their insider knowledge to help law enforcement capture a new threat. This flawed premise has several origin stories, but Ted Bundy's efforts to help catch the Green River Killer might be the most interesting. Robert Theodore Bundy received 3 death sentences throughout 1979 and 1980. Bundy confessed 9 years later. 4 years into his death row stint, he reached out to investigator Robert Keppel and offered his help as an expert investigator in the Green River Killer case. Keppel wrote, "The Riverman, Ted Bundy and I Hunt the Green River Killer" in 1995. The book features a lot of interesting insights into Bundy's mind. Keppel regularly prompted Bundy to provide assistance by praising him. This led to a fair amount of negative chatter about the so-called Rivermen. Gerard Schaefer didn't think much of Ted Bundy. Killers often express a sense of superiority over other killers. For example, Gerard Schaefer thought little of Ted Bundy. Schaefer was convicted of killing 2 young women, though he may have had as many as 30 victims. The real window into Schaefer's mind comes through Sandra London, who dated Schaefer in high school and reconnected with him after his conviction. Shortly after Schaefer's death in prison, London wrote an extended online post about her experience with him. Schaefer apparently talked about Bundy all the time. London recounts several long-winded brags that mark Bundy as Schaefer's perceived rival, with Schaefer applauding himself for exceeding Bundy's victim count. He also suggested that he kept Bundy spellbound in a conversation about their habits. Schaefer even had the gall to suggest that Bundy was mimicking him. London quoted him as saying, "He was playing at copycat and doing a poor job of it at that." Danny Rolling and Gerard Schaefer fought over a woman. Sandra London became romantically involved with multiple serial killers, including Danny Rolling, also known as the Gainesville Ripper. He confessed to 8 murders, but the state of Florida gave him the death penalty for 5. While awaiting his execution, Rolling met Sandra London. They were engaged at one point. The bizarre circumstance opened the door for Rowling and fellow killer Gerard Schaefer to express exactly how they felt about each other. In London's Killer Fiction, Stories That Convicted the Ex-Cop of Murder, Schaefer hurled several insults at Rowling. Schaefer co-wrote the book through letters to London, calling Rowling a coward in an unhinged screed. He objects to the idea of his writing benefiting Rowling in any way. As if to counter him, the back of the book features quotes from killers, including Rowling. Rowling considered the book well-written puke. This back and forth went on until Schaefer died in prison. Rowling and Schaefer were both incarcerated at Florida State Prison. In a letter to London, Rowling suggested that Schaefer was in danger. He was quickly proven right. Schaefer was stabbed to death by another inmate in December 1995. Rowling and Schaefer seemed to hate each other with or without London, but she really drew their opinions into the open.